Welcome to GS Podcast number 97 already. I'm Stephen Knight. I'm going to be bringing you some coverage of the National Secular Society's Secularist of the Year Awards. That took place in central London on this past Saturday the 18th of March. So that was before the horrible terror attacks we saw in Westminster. So that'll explain why that's not referenced in any of the speeches you're about to hear. I imagine I'll be speaking about that attack in great detail in a planned recording of Taking the Myth next week. So rather than dwell on that now and detract from the great work of the secular activists honoured at this event, I'll just push on. There were a number of nominees, but the main prize went to a lady called Yasmin Rehman for her advocacy of a secularist approach to tackling hate crime and promoting the human rights of women. Yasmin is a Muslim. She's affiliated with the One Law for All campaign, which is an organisation whose work I admire and I am familiar with. I wasn't familiar with Yasmin as an individual, but I'm very glad that's changed. Very passionate acceptance speech, so I'll be very keen to hear your feedback on that. You'll hear a number of speeches and speakers during this episode, so if you go to the show notes of the podcast, I've just highlighted who each of these individuals are and a few links to where you can find out some more information. I'm a member of the National Secular Society myself. I'm really grateful for the work they do in promoting human rights and secularism, not just domestically, but with an international outlook as well. It's great to spend time with the personnel there and just hear how passionate they are and how engaged they are on this topic. So it's my suggestion that if you're passionate about secularism too, maybe consider supporting the National Secular Society. You can do this by becoming a member. You can join at secularism.org.uk. You can't become a member at the moment. Take a look at some of the campaigns they're currently engaged in and consider sharing that around your various social networks or write to your MP about them. Get as active as you can and I'm sure they'd be very grateful. You can keep up to date on this very podcast at gspellchecker.com. Enjoy!
There's a word that some folks find real hard to spell. Ain't it horrible except after saying who cared to go burn in hell? But then along came a man, his spell took across the God of Creed, and he set out upon a noble quest to help those that don't know what it means. And he said, it goes A-C-H-E-I-S-T, and don't you put that I before that E. A-C-H-E-I-S-T, don't mean we know it's means we don't believe. And he keeps telling them things that God is saying. A reason shoppers at night will make them run away, but if they start that fight, well, they can go all day. Spell checker, he's a guy, spell checker. Now you know how it goes, so sing along with me. A-C-H-E-I-S-T, A-C-H-E-I-S-T, A-C-H-E-I-S-T,
Secularism does not take religious sides. It has no theological favourites. Under a real secular constitution, religion gets on with its business separately from the state and vice versa. Neither should interfere with the other unless the bounds of law and justice are being breached. I'm particularly pleased this afternoon that we have a secularist who is also a Muslim to present our prizes. She's living proof that secularism and Muslims can coexist happily if given half a chance. She co-founded a British Muslims for Secular Democracy in 2006. She's a journalist and a commentator and a pundit. And earlier this week, she won the Broadsheet Columnist of the Year title at the Press Awards. She's gained her reputation by not always being predictable. She trades sometimes in controversial opinions, and we like that at the NSS. We're all for free speech and the free exchange of opinions. Please welcome Yasmin Alibhai-Brown.
I really didn't know so many people would be gathered, and I would have dressed up a bit more to compete with you, but obviously that can't happen now. But thank you very much. I just want to say a couple of really important things. The thing I find interesting and frightening at the moment, especially when I talk to young Muslims, is how few of them understand what secular means. And I think if there's one job the society probably needs to do, is to make sure everybody understands secularism is not atheism. Atheists are part of the secular, whatever we call it, but you can have faith and be a secularist. And I don't know how, in our education system, this fundamental message has failed to get through to young people. So a plea really, if you can come up with something so that people don't fear it as irreligious, it might be very good, especially for the younger generations of, in some ways, very troubled and confused young Muslims. Two other very important points. After the ruling last week from the Court of Human Rights, I've been so shocked by the misunderstandings. The problem is not that Muslims are being attacked. Muslims are being attacked. For goodness sake, I'm attacked every minute of my life. It's the exceptionalisms that have grown and grown. So Muslim exceptionalism, whether it's school uniform or 100 different things, has taken root. Jewish exceptionalism has also taken root, and Christian exceptionalism is the norm if one thinks about the history of it. And I think it's the exceptionalism that needs to be challenged, and the universalism needs to be promoted. I went to a school in Delhi not that long ago. 1,000 young girls in the school. It's a very Muslim city, at least the part I was in. There wasn't a single girl with a headscarf. So I asked the young headmistress, said, nobody wears a headscarf. And she looked at me, very puzzled. And she said, well, why would they? So I said, it's the uniform. She said, you understand the meaning, uniform? I said, yes, I know, but has anybody asked? And she said, yes, once, family from Blackburn. And the two other very quick points. When the faith I grew up with, faith was in your heart. Faith was your relationship with God. Faith was indoors, after the satanic verses, and that wasn't the fault of Muslims. I think there were a lot of things that happened then that created a whole them and us situation. But my faith anyway, started coming outdoors and becoming very noisy and very demanding and very political. And in a sense, the saddest thing is that the inner faith, the faith that was indoors and in our hearts, seems to have been replaced by this almost totally and constantly disgruntled, paranoid, noisy thing that calls itself religion, faith, but is actually a kind of political religion. I find this very depressing. I've been recently to India. I've been to India a lot. In my last visit, which was 5 weeks ago, I was truly shocked at how this once secular nation, how Hindu fanaticism, it has crept up at every level of society. It took no time. Modi came in, Modi was a banned person, remember? And it is now at every level of society. So, and we see what's happened in Turkey. And we have to also remember here how churches blessed, a lot of churches, black churches, blessed Trump. Never forget that. As did many Muslims, something like 23% of American Muslims voted for this man, okay, because they thought he was religious when I talked to them. We have the daughter of a churchman here, the Mrs. May, who refuses the fundamental principle of Christianity, refuses to take in refugee children. Okay, Christ the baby was a refugee child. And so the way religion has become privileged and powerful, and the way secularism is now cast as the enemy, we have a lot of work to do. And I wish you much luck with the project because, like so many other struggles, we thought things were going to get better, and we have receded into a very dark age wherever we are. I'm sorry to make you miserable after your pudding. Do I?
Yeah, thank you. Across the UK, we have laws requiring, in some cases, daily Christian acts of worship in schools. While many schools just ignore the law and hold inclusive assemblies, it's still enforced in far too many places. In one example recently, a parent told us that they felt the need to switch their child's school as they were being singled out for not partaking in the prayer that preceded every single lesson. In the past year, the NSS has met with the Welsh education officials, lobbied the Scottish Government and the DfE on this issue. And we've been pleased to cover the campaign of one of our shortlisted nominees in Northern Ireland. We're very pleased to have with us today Scott Moore, founder of Let Pupils Choose, a campaign against compulsory school worship. So please come up, Scott Moore.
Honoured guests, 5 nominees are renowned and have devoted themselves to fairness and equality between people of differing beliefs and identities, but at least one has been campaigning for his entire adult life. That's the past 9 months because I'm 18. But I need to introduce myself. My name is Scott Moore, and I was never given the choice of my beliefs. I had to take it. Until I was 12, I didn't know you could be non-religious. I didn't know you could choose your beliefs. I thought religion was simply inherited from your parents or your community. Nobody told me otherwise. I prayed in school assemblies, I attended RE, set by churches, and I went to school services in churches. Throughout, Christianity, or religious belief, was taught to me as absolute fact. To tell a child a religious belief is absolute fact is to lie to them, regardless of what it is. The education system lied to me to rob my freedom of belief. Legally, if you want withdrawn from all of that, like collective worship and so on, you need parental permission. If your parents don't agree, that's a challenge. I fought for 3 years to convince my parents to opt me out, and I succeeded because I was willing to fight. In Northern Ireland, faith instead of evidence justifies laws. Schools refuse to employ teachers because of their beliefs. Boards of governors and schools must have clergy on them, and it's clear, equality isn't where it should be in Northern Ireland. All belief systems should be treated equally, but they're not. I fought to be recognised. We must now ensure that no one has to fight for parity of esteem. We are demanding an opt-out for over 16s from collective worship without parental permission. Make no mistake, secularists in Northern Ireland are organising. We will refuse to accept anything less than absolute parity of esteem, absolute freedom of belief, absolute equality of all beliefs before the law, and absolute separation of church and state. As secularists of belief and non-belief, together we can make a difference. Together we can give every child freedom of belief. Together we can make sure every school respects every child's beliefs. Together, we can give every child the choice of their beliefs. Together, we can. Thank you.
There is hope for the future. Over the years, we've been able to recognise an incredible range of activists with the Tipsy shortlist. However, I can truly say that this year's list is very special. I first became aware of Houzan Mahmoud through her work on the Kurdish Culture Project. This is a platform for Kurdish writers, feminists, artists and activists to advance gender equality, freedom and universal rights. It reminds us that the struggle for secularism and against religious totalitarianism is not just about politics, but about the lived experience of real people. Totalitarians often fear the arts for their ability to open the first breathing space where ideas can be challenged. So can everyone give a hand to Houzan Mahmoud?
Good afternoon. I'm from Iraqi Kurdistan, and I'm sure you all know that we are in the forefront of fighting ISIS, the notorious Islamic State of Syria and Iraq. And one of the nightmares of ISIS terrorists was not to be killed by Kurdish women because they will lose the opportunity to meet their 72 virgins in heaven. So we made sure, Kurdish women made sure that they are deprived from touching women in Kurdistan, but also to actually ruin their dream of being rapists in heaven as well. So it's a pleasure, it's an honor to be here. And thank you so much for considering the Work of Culture Project and the work of various feminists and activists and writers and poets and artists in Kurdistan. Through their creativity, through their everyday activism, they are trying to make sure that censorship in the format of religious or political dogmas should not undermine our work, should not undermine our struggle. And secularism, as you said as well, cannot be fought only through political activism, but also through everyday creativity, through art, through music, through literature, through poetry. And this is what Culture Project is trying to do, to provide that platform. And I'm looking forward to support and solidarity because the struggle is one. And I have to mention that I'm so much against identity politics, and I think what deprives us and what divides us is that the identity politics that is toxic, that is poisonous, and we are all human, and through our project, through our organizations and magazines and online gatherings like here, we should reinforce the importance of progressive ideals, of universal rights. We are all humans. We deserve the same rights and freedoms and equalities. No less, no more. Thank you so much, and I'm honored.
I'm delighted to be speaking later on this year at the Defending Progressivism Conference, which is organised by our friends at Conatus News and also the Kurdish Culture Project. That will be at the end of April, and you can find more information if you want to come on our website. And now we come to a very special award for a lifetime of campaigning on secularist, humanist and atheist free-thought issues. Many of you will know Barry Duke as the present editor of The Freethinker, but what is not so well known is his long and colourful backstory. From his earliest days in journalism in apartheid South Africa, Barry has aggressively fought censorship. He bravely wrote in opposition to the powerful and very racist Publications and Entertainment's Control Board, which oversaw what was and was not acceptable to the authorities in South Africa at the time. At that time, there were around 60,000 items banned by the censors. Needless to say, The Freethinker was on that list of subversive publications and could not be tolerated. As well as the usual stuff that authoritarians think of as threatening to their power, anything critical of Christianity was branded objectionable. Even the children's book, Black Beauty, and a poster declaring black is beautiful fell victim to the censors. It all seems ridiculous now, but at the time it was very, very oppressive to an awful lot of people, and it made the lives of so many South Africans hellish. Barry's agitation prompted a strong backlash against the censors from academics, writers and others, This in turn led to legislation making even any criticism of the census activities a criminal offence. So Barry fled South Africa when he was tipped off that he was in imminent danger of being detained for a violation of the Suppression of Communism Act. After he was granted asylum in the UK in 1973, he immediately made contact with Bill McElroy, a former NSS General Secretary, but at the time the editor of the Freethinker. Barry then began writing articles for the magazine about his experiences of censorship in apartheid South Africa and their links to the Calvinist Christianity upon which many of the laws of the country were based. He had no inkling at the time that he would one day become the magazine's editor, a job he has now done for just over 20 years. Having settled in the UK, he became actively involved in humanism, atheism, gay rights. In 1979, when he was a director of the NSS, he was a founding member of the Gay Humanist Group, after Mary Whitehouse began a private prosecution for blasphemous libel against gay news. He and his late partner, Brian Parry, then launched a magazine for the group. Around 5 years ago, he was asked by the UK gay humanist charity, the Pink Triangle Trust, to launch an online magazine and a website. And after settling in Spain in 2010, he became involved in the creation of Benidorm's first gay pride event, working alongside Spanish, British and Dutch activists and attending meetings with the city's mayor and other elected officials. Barry has now become involved in the Costa Blanca press, where his objections to an article saying that Spain had been better under Franco because it kept women and gays in their place, resulted in the editor of Euro Weekly News inviting him to write a regular column. Despite his age, and I'm sure he doesn't mind me telling you, he was 70 last month, and the amount of work he does 7 days a week to keep the Freethinker and the Pink Humanist websites and Facebook pages updated on a daily basis, his passion for social justice, equality and free speech burns as brightly today as it did when he first began challenging racists and bigots in the earliest days as a journalist. I think you'll agree that Barry deserves a recognition of this Lifetime Achievement Award and the encouragement to keep on keeping on. I'm very pleased to say that he's with us today from his home in Spain. So, ladies and gentlemen, Barry Duke.
I'll keep it short, but first of all, I'd just say Buenas tardes, amigos. And that's as much Spanish as you're going to get out of me today, because I'm pretty embarrassed about the amount of Spanish that I've actually learned in the last 7 years. I've been working too hard. Language doesn't come a new language doesn't come easy when you're an expat and you're my age. But I try. I was saying to a Spanish fellow in the bar a few weeks ago, trying to have a conversation in Spanish, and I said to him, I am so embarrassed about the level of Spanish that I have. And I assumed that the word for embarrassed in Spanish was embarazado. He said, no posible. I asked the barman what I might have just told this man. And he said to me, you've just told him you're pregnant. Anyway. And I wasn't, no. Anyway, just to go back, when I got news of the award, when I got over the shock of it, I suddenly, and being asked by Terry to put together a little bit about my background and keep it to less than 50,000 words, I had to cast my mind back and wondered how I got from there to here. And I have to say to you that it goes back to when I was 15. And what happened is that we had a neighbour that my mother told me never to associate with because he was an atheist. But he also had a son who was the same age as I was. But this man, and because I had an enormous passion for reading, this man said to me one day, I want you to read this book. And it was James Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, which is about the burning of books. And I found it absolutely fascinating. It was written in 1953, and it was about censorship. And it was on the banned list in South Africa as well. Anyway, I got hold of this book, read it, was totally fascinated by it, and we were in, our English teacher at the high school that we were at asked every kid to bring his favourite book in, and I brought in Fahrenheit 451. The teacher looked at me and said, I don't know this book, what is it? I said, well, if you want to know about it, I said, go to the library, look up Jacobson's Index to Objectionable Literature, and you will find it listed with all the other 60,000 books that we are not allowed to read. I was 15 at the time. When it was discovered that I was in possession of a banned book, that was my first caning. The second violation was when, at a school assembly, ahead of a general election in 1961, we were all asked to stand and pray that Hendrik Verwoerd would win the next general election. You didn't have to pray for that. You knew he was going to win the next general election because nobody other than white Afrikaners who were in the majority would vote for him. So I refused to stand up and pray. And it was noted. Then everybody was asked to stand up and sing the national anthem. I sat down and refused to sing the national anthem. A finger was pointed at me from the stage by the headmaster and said, you will stand up and you will sing the national anthem. So I sang Sikalale Africa, which was the anthem of the then banned African National Congress. When I was hauled into the headmaster's office, caned, and told that I was going to be expelled for this. The headmaster said to me, Duke, you're a born troublemaker, and you'll be a troublemaker for the rest of your life. I took to be a career advice. The award that I got today proves that there are benefits in being a rebel with a cause.
And now we come to the big one, the winner of our Owen Prize for Secularist of the Year 2017. This year we're honouring another brave and determined woman from a Muslim background. Her name is Yasmin Rehman. Yasmin has been working as part of the One Law for All Sharia campaign, gathering together and bringing to public attention the testimonies of women who've been victimised by extremists in the Muslim communities in which they live. Inevitably, these activities have not been popular with some and have resulted in threats from Islamists to her own safety and to that of her family. One of her campaigns is to push for a wider public and political debate on marriage practices in Islam. She studied and written extensively on these practices and the resulting harm that they do to women and children. She worked for some years with the Metropolitan Police in the area of forced marriage and so-called honour-based violence. Lately, she's been researching polygamy and temporary marriage and has a book on these topics coming out at the end of the year. Yasmin has spent much of the past 2 years trying to get the cross-government hate crimes working group to recognise the dangers faced by ex-Muslims and minorities, including Ahmadiyya Muslims, from Islamist extremists. Her commitment to advancing the rights of women is unquestionable, and she's used her own home as a shelter for women who are under threat of murder and sexual violence. She recognises that a secular position in legal and policy areas is the only one that will protect women in these situations. I don't want to preempt Yasmin's speech because I know how annoying it is when you make all the points that the other person was about to make and leave them with nothing to say. So please come up, Yasmin, and receive your award for Secularist of the Year 2017.
Gosh, if I wasn't nervous before, having heard Scott, I'm terrified. Oh, right, on with the glasses. Terry made some jokes about the Oscars, and I was going to make a joke about the envelope. But when I told my son that I'd been nominated, he sent me a link to Gwyneth Paltrow's Oscar speech from several years ago. And said, whatever you do, Mum, don't do that. So I'm going to try my very best not to burst into tears. I'm a bit overwhelmed. So please forgive me. I've not won a prize since the needlework prize at school, which is very long time ago. So I've got a few thank yous, and I've got a couple of things that I want to go on to say. A huge thank you to Terry, Stephen, Alistair, and everyone at the National Secular Society for this recognition. But special thank you to Keith, who has been an incredible source of support, advice, and a listening ear when I've needed it. There have been some dark days recently, and he's calmed me down over cups of tea. So I'm very grateful to him for that. I'm incredibly humbled and honoured to be included in the list of nominees, especially as there are some personal heroines amongst them. Asma Jahangir, who works in Pakistan, the country that my parents come from, and I've watched it disintegrate over the course of my lifetime. As I currently stand, I don't know if I will ever go back because of the danger that's posed to me because of my work here, and also because I don't want to put my family at further risk. Ted Cantle, whose work I followed, particularly since the Oldham riots. I look forward to finding out more about Stephen Kettle's work and, of course, Scott's, and working together with you, hopefully, in the future. But to Houzan, my sister, my friend, and fellow campaigner in the One Law for All campaign, we should be standing up here together, I think. There are a couple of other thank yous, and then I will go on to what I was going to say. There were two women here without whose support I'm not sure I would have been able to keep going. To Mariam Namazi and Gita Sehgal, I owe you so much. We have fought some battles together, and I stood with Mariam and the One Law for All campaign when she had a very particular press amongst liberal Muslims. Forget about the extremists at one, and I think that's changed. And I was honoured to stand with her because she was brave enough to say the things that at that time I wasn't brave enough to say. And to Gita, who I've learnt so much from and who I work with at the Centre for Secular Space. We keep on fighting and we keep on going. And we do it because we've got each other's support. And finally to David, my husband, who doesn't often get a mention. That's the last thank you, but thank you for being my rock, and you'll be helping with stuff when we get home. Some of what I was going to say has been said in terms of what I understand secularism to be. It's not anti-religion. Yasmin said it, Terry has said it. I think it's the only state structure that we can have that can limit the power of religion. I'm a woman of faith. It's not a conflict. It's not a conflict to have a religious belief and also be a secularist. I want to limit and contain the power that religious bodies have. I'm a feminist, and that doesn't sit comfortably with the faith that I was born into or that I've been raised in. And I'm not, and whilst religion does oppress women, I'm not saying that in secular spaces they're not, so we must always be vigilant whichever space we're in. And I also think that when we talk about ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, that we have to remind ourselves of what goes before. Those subtle messages every day that are taught in our schools, that are pumped into our homes through satellite TV channels, through drama, through film, that reinforce that othering of anyone who is not like us. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the work that I've done through the Centre for Secular Space, but also on my own. A few years ago, I started looking at satellite TV channels, looking at a basic Sky package, not one of the all singing, all dancing with movies and football. At that time, 6 years ago, there were 35 religious channels. And I'm only looking at the ones that are broadcast in the languages that I speak and that I understand, so English, Punjabi, Hindi and Urdu. There are other channels in other languages, should you care to look out for them, but 35 channels where hate preachers like Zakir Naik are able to pump out their vile, where liberal, so-called liberal, preachers like Ajmal Masroor, who's based in East London, is also able to reinforce his vile views on women and where women's place in society should be. And he's made this very, very clear to me himself personally by labelling me an apostate, which carries with it its own particular issues. But these messages are there all the time. And I've tried to raise these issues, and I've been shut down, whether I've done it through an organisation or through my own work. I've been shut down as Islamophobic and as a racist. Now this is deeply, deeply painful. I've been working on anti-racism issues and feminism for 32 years now. And there seems to be a movement that silences us by this use of Islamophobia. Islamophobia is the only form of racism that is now ever discussed. Now, I'm not saying there is not anti-Muslim sentiment. There absolutely is, and Trump's had a mention, so I won't mention him again. But to silence any dissent, any challenges with that allegation, and then to follow it up with the label of apostasy, and is deeply dangerous in the community that I come from because it carries the death sentence. Mariam knows this only too well. And that's where the threats emanate from. And this is not about me personally. I'm supported. I have a public position that I often take speaking at various venues. So, and I also have some inkling of how the police operate, but they're not particularly great a lot of the time. Any dissent is silenced, and yet Muslims are told that you don't speak up. Speaking up brings with it its own inherent dangers. And we're surrounded by this Islamist narrative, whether it's through those TV channels, whether it's through those drama series, where now the normalisation of the hijab, every image of a Muslim woman is now a hijabbed woman. There is no space for any Muslim woman who chooses to not cover, or who chooses not to adopt Islamist dress. The very way that religion is practiced is so controlled. I don't recognise the Islam that is now put forward as the authentic Islam, and the state is complicit in propagating this message. Tony Blair and his sort of going around with a number of extremist preachers as these are the voices of the community, without actually ever allowing the community to speak for themselves. The community is not one thing. So So I think we have to be really careful, and we have to learn the lessons of the past. If any of you have not read A Social History of the Third Reich by Richard Grimberger, I would recommend that you do. It talks about how Goebbels used propaganda, about how music was taken over, that Wagner was pumped into factories, about the imagery that was used to promote the image of the Aryan race as supreme. And the Islamists are no exception, absolutely no exception, in terms of the modus operandi that they're choosing to follow. The other point I wanted to make was to pick up on something Yasmin had said earlier about secularism and the message. There is something very particular about how secularism, secularists are viewed at the moment. It is impossible to get any sort of funding or recognition of secular work, particularly in feminist spaces. It's seen as anti-theist, as anti-religion, as racist, as discriminatory. Now, I think that's part of the Islamist machinery, putting out that message and saying that they're not like us, so they don't want us to be able to practice. They're denying our right to have freedom of religion. And I think that they're gaining in power. They're gaining in power through the lobbies, through faith schools, through their connections to government, local and central, and now through, as we're saying, through parallel legal systems and the Sharia courts. And we have to be really careful, or there won't be many of us left. If you look at the black and minority ethnic women's sector, there are only faith-based organisations. Now, there are 17 organisations left in London following the cuts, and most of those take a faith-based approach. Where are the groups, the new groups like Southall Black Sisters? Where are the secular groups? Where do women who are seeking help and support, who are suffering abuse that is justified by religion, that is often perpetrated by religious leaders, where do they go? Where they're not judged. There's a woman I'm working with, Gita and I are working with at the moment, who has suffered horrific abuse at the hands of an imam. She lives in London, and without giving away too much of her story, she's like many other Muslim women at this moment who have bought into the message of, if you're ill, you don't need to go and see a medical practitioner, you need to go and see a sheikh, who will give you a talisman, who will give you prayers, who will give you absolution, and all your problems will be solved. And this man has basically exploited her vulnerability, taken wads of money from her, and basically been procuring her for, and sexually exploiting her to powerful men in the community. She's just one story. There's something going on in this capital that is being ignored. Take a walk down Commercial Road, just walk around the East End, walk around Tower Hamlets, you will see hijama clinics all over. Resolution is now absolutely religious for some women. There is no other choice. So to the untrained eye, these are cupping clinics where you can go for an alternative therapy. But actually, we've got families in this country, through those media channels I talked about at the beginning, through community networks, being told that you don't need to sit. If you've got mental health problems, it's basically that you're not religious enough, and that you need to get a talisman, and you need to pray, and you need to beg for forgiveness. If you've got a physical ailment, it's a punishment from God because you are not religious enough. If you have a child born with a disability, it is because you are not religious enough, and you must beg for forgiveness. And these are popping up all over the East End, yet where is the conversation about them? And it's really difficult. Sometimes Gita and I are lone voices trying to raise some of these issues. Terry mentioned my work on marriage practices, polygamy and temporary marriages. It's almost impossible to get the government to take on this issue. I thought naively for a few years that it was because it was in the too difficult box. And now I think it's because it's a religious practice. Forced marriage and honour-based violence could so easily be dismissed because they were seen to be cultural practices. You had religious leader after religious leader saying this is nothing to do with Islam, nothing to do with Sikhism, nothing to do with Hinduism. There is no denying that polygamy and temporary marriage are Islamic marriage practices. It goes to the very core of how the state can balance freedom of religion with freedom from harm and abuse. It's raised occasionally. Baroness Varsi raised it in terms of immigration, and Baroness Flavor raised it in terms of welfare benefits. Nobody ever talks about the women and the children and what it does to those women and children. We have no idea of the numbers of families who are in these multiple marriage setups, and yet the state will be picking up the pieces at some point of children in the care system, of mothers who will need support to deal with the mental health impacts and the fallout. And in the meantime, because we're afraid of challenging these extremist interpretations of Islam, the men will continue to get away with it. And if we allow them to get away with this, isn't this just the slippery road to child marriage? At some point, child marriage is also endorsed by Islam. As a Muslim, I want somebody to stand up and start with me to say that there is no space anywhere, not just in the UK, but anywhere for these practices. There are other things that I had wanted to talk about, but I think I'm going to stop there because I'm getting quite emotional. I just want to end on something that was said earlier about the lived experiences, that I think Houzan said it, about the lived experiences of people. Everything from our lives is being eroded. I hate identity politics. I'm not just a Muslim woman. I'm a woman, I'm a human being, I'm many things. I grew up in the northeast. It makes me a Geordie, not a Londoner. There were so many facets to my personality and who I am, just as there would be with you. Think about what it means to be reduced to just one aspect of who you are and what that does. And then to have someone come and tell you, and groups of very powerful people, tell you what that something should be. This is how you should dress, this is what you can eat, this is what you can wear. You can't listen to music, you can't practice your faith in the way that you have. The Sufi shrines have been such an important part of my life, and we've recently seen the bombing at the shrine of Shahbaz Qalandar in Pakistan, the exclusion of women from every public place. And yet when the government does reports about the educational attainment of Pakistani Bangladeshi women, particularly Muslim women, as we're now labelled, and says they're not part of the workforce, they never ask the question as to why. Yes, there's discrimination, but there's also great powers within the community who are holding women back, and in turn holding a lot of the men back too, by creating this victim narrative and letting that victim narrative take hold as strongly as it has. We've got to challenge identity politics, wherever it is, and we have to stand together, people of faith, people of no faith, to do that, because the cost is too frightening. If I can sit in London and face and Mariam and Gita and Houzan and face some of the threats that we face, threats of sexual violence, threats of death, threats of the sexual violence not just directed at us. The most frightening thing was the threat that was made against my daughter and my mother. This is not Pakistan, this is not Bangladesh, this is not Iraq, this is not Kurdistan, this is not Iran, this is the United Kingdom, this is London 2017. And the very same groups that make those threats are the groups who have access to the corridors of power. We have to be really careful, and we have to be really, really vigilant. I'm sorry to bring the room down. Sorry, Yasmin, I followed you on that. But thank you again for this award. The fight continues, and hopefully we'll fight it together. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Godless Spell Checker podcast. The show is 100% listener supported, so if you enjoy it, please consider lending some support. You can do this in a number of ways. You can become an official patron of the show by visiting patreon.com/gspellchecker. You can also help by leaving a review or sharing it around your various social networks. To find out other ways you can support the show, either via PayPal or Audible, please head to gspellchecker.com/support. Think we've all learned something here today?